They are very worried about unrest. They're very worried about trouble at various polling stations. And the National Guard everywhere is on high alert for any trouble. I think it's very dangerous.
Trump is already on stage saying they're cheating. Do you see what they're doing with the ballots?
Now, when we talk about the future of America, whether or not Trump is elected, so much of his movement is just him. Does his movement actually fizzle and come away because no one can do what he does?
It's the only question that people ask me from London. I get texts every day.
Who's going to win?
I get emails saying, come on, who's going to win? That's all they care about. But my guess is going to be this. Wait for this. Hold on to your chair. Welcome to this latest edition of the American Fourcast. This one is a little bit different. Instead of interviewing American guests and surrogates for the campaigns, we're going to be talking, well, to each other. It's a little huddle of Channel 4 experts. Siobhan Kennedy, you're going to tell us in a minute where you are, traveling with Kamala Harris. Kiran Moodley, traveling with Donald Trump. But looking from where you are, I can't tell where you are, Kiran. You've got a net curtain behind you and a bit of a park. You could be anywhere. So
I'm trying to stop the full blast of the Florida sun because I'm in Miami, which is obviously just down the road from Mar-a-Lago, where Donald Trump will be on election night. And Florida also, of course, once a swing state, now no longer, because it really is a state which speaks to sort of Donald Trump's popularity, how he's transformed the Republican Party. This was a state which Barack Obama won twice, obviously, in 2008, 2012. Now it's solidly red. So that's where I am.
Actually, you just want to be in Miami, don't you? Because it's one of your favourite cities. I know that's
absolutely.
And Siobhan, where are you?
Yes, I am in rustic Pennsylvania.
I tell you what I think. I mean, I've covered God knows how many American elections, and mostly, my head tells me one thing and my gut tells me the same. Obama 2008, it was kind of obvious what was happening. No big surprises. George W. Bush versus John Kerry 2004, a little bit more tricky. And, my gut was telling me Bush, my head was telling me maybe Kerry. 2016, the gut said Trump, the head said Clinton. This time round, my organs are confused and they're confusing me. So whenever I go to a sort of pro-Trump event, I think, my God, look at that
He's got
energy.
It.
He's nailed it. When I go to a Harris event, it's like, oh God, she's got it. And then, of course, the polls really aren't helping. I wonder if you feel the same. First, you, Siobhan.
Well, I do feel the same. Yeah. I mean, I've swung exactly both ways. It's not just the MAGA brigade. It's not just talking to the real entrenched Trump till I die. It was a young bartender in the hotel we were in last night, a young 20-something mother with 2 young children, who you would think would be precisely the kind of person that Harris would potentially be winning over with all her talk of childcare and obviously women's rights. And yet she looked us straight and said, oh, no, I'm all Trump. And not only am I all Trump, I'm scared about what they're doing already to try and make it not all Trump. So I think it's kind of the cross the piece that we're hearing for Trump. It's everyday Americans for Trump, not just the MAGA brigade. I'm not saying my gut is going for Trump, but they make more noise, don't they? They make more noise, is what I would say.
I wonder. I mean, Kiran, you spend a lot of time with the Trump people, but you also know what the other side feels like. Do you agree with Siobhan and me that actually it is tough this time? It's really, really hard to know which way this is heading.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, going back to when you were originally talking about, you go to a Trump rally and you get that sort of that vibe, and then you go to a Harris rally. And what this is all really about, right, is the people who don't go to those rallies. It's the people in the middle, right, who are actually quite hard to try and find where they go to. We were in Michigan hanging out with a guy who's part of the Haley voters for Harris. So that's, Nikki Haley voters. There were more than 4 million of them in the Republican presidential primaries who wanted her over Donald Trump. And so he's out campaigning to try and see what those Haley voters are doing. She's obviously endorsed Donald Trump, but not completely, wholeheartedly, and she's criticized the campaign. And, we went to an event which was a Michigan Hall of Honors event in the capital, Lansing. And I sort of said, why do you go to these events? And he said, because, where do you find these middle-of-the-ground individuals who might not particularly like Kamala Harris, don't really know what she's about, angry at the Biden administration, but also don't really like Trump? They're not going to a Trump rally and they're not going to a Kamala Harris rally. They're not necessarily going to these political events. And I think that's why I think, feel this sort of, it's hard to anticipate what's going on, because it feels like it's these silent voters. Is it that Harris might be ahead, as we saw in this Iowa poll the other day, because there are those sort of silent older voters and others who these polls aren't picking up, who might be not telling their husbands or their family that they're not voting for Trump because they're traditionally Republicans? Or is it the silent voters on the Trump side, the young men who don't normally vote? So that's what it's the people who are caught in between these two things. And that's kind of a tricky thing to do. And we sort of have to rely on sort of anecdotes and trying to find those people who fall through the cracks.
In this election, what's so weird is that we're not even talking about policies. Forget policies, right? We should be talking about that. Maybe we'll do that the day after. But what we're trying to do, all of us, is to assess the psychology, to read the minds of people who are when they matter, which is the kind of 50,000 swing voters in 3 states, are inscrutable. I just wonder, Kiran, what you think of these polls out of Iowa, the Iowa poll, which seem to indicate that women, even in a conservative state like Iowa, are breaking for Harris. And, certainly amongst Democrats, that was a big deal. Do you agree with that? Was it a big deal?
Yeah, I mean, again, the interesting thing there is that, in the run-up to an election day, you always obviously focus on the swing states. And all of a sudden we have Iowa, this Republican stronghold showing us, this Harris ahead 47-43 in Iowa, which hasn't been won by Democrats since Obama. It's interesting on both sides. The Trump team very quickly, within about an hour or two, quickly sent an email, with a press release saying this poll was garbage, don't believe it, type thing. So clearly, whether that's them just instantly pushing back or whether they're worried. On the Democratic side, I think there's this cautious optimism right at the moment. It's sort of saying, yes, she could be ahead, but we don't really think that to be the case. That would be, an absolute massive Harris, blowout win, which I don't think they necessarily expect. But if it is indicating that there are these suburban white women, and that is the theme at the moment, this idea that women will win the election for Harris if she were to win, then it doesn't really matter whether or not that gets her over the line in Iowa, but it is really that those are the Midwestern women voters who get her over the line when it comes to the Rust Belt, which is, of course, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, the ones that they really need.
I mean, the other thing I wonder is, do you think it's possible, in this very complicated election with all these nuances, to sum it up as, Kamala Harris's Achilles heel is her view on the economy, or the lack of a view, or the lack of a policy, or the lack of feeling people's pain, even though the headline numbers are quite good. And, even the conservative Wall Street Journal the other day said the economy is going gangbusters. The thing I really come across over and over again is that people aren't feeling it. So that's her Achilles heel. And his Achilles heel is Donald Trump himself, his character, his inability to keep his mouth shut, to not say the most offensive thing to people, especially in the middle. I'm going to ask you all a really basic question, which is, what is the most memorable thing that you've heard or seen in the last 48 hours? Siobhan.
I think I'm gonna go to the Puerto Rican rally when the mayor of Redding, which is a majority Latino city in Berks County, which is as tight can be for an swing state. He stood there at the microphone, and of the garbage comments this time last week, in fact, in New York, he leaned forward and said, Donald Trump, you've messed with the wrong island. You've messed with the wrong people. And we're going to give you our answer on Tuesday. And I know I've met that man, so I know that was anger I was genuinely hearing. And the other people that were there that weren't simply Puerto Ricans turning up to this rally to vent their anger, they were Guatemalans, they were Latinos of all stripes. And they all said that some of us who were sitting on the fence, perhaps not going to vote at all, or even one I met who was voting for Trump, who has changed his mind because of that. I heard real anger, real passion. We're Americans too.
And I wonder if that's actually how they're going to vote, or if they're just telling you that. I just always have to, ask myself that question, whether what you're hearing is the truth. I think that's a fair question. Kiran, what about you? The most memorable thing in the last 48 hours, apart from this podcast?
The most memorable thing for me, actually, is two individuals I spoke to in Saginaw, which is a bellwether county in Michigan. And it's two men, two Trump fans, who told me two very different things, which I think sort of goes to the essence of us all being confused about where this is going. So this was a Trump shop, which is now the Republican Party headquarters in Saginaw. A guy called Paul Billow came in and he picked up a whole load of signs. And I was asking him about picking up the signs. And he said, I'm getting my first Trump sign because I'm no longer afraid of being a Trump supporter. So that idea that, we constantly talk about these silent Trump voters who the polls never pick up. So I felt a sense there from this guy that he was saying, actually, people aren't afraid to say they support Trump anymore, right? It's 8-9 years down the line. We now know that we are big Trump supporters and we will say that, right? But then when I spoke to the actual chair of the Republican Party and the shop, he was saying when it comes to the polls, him and all of his friends never, ever pick up the phone or never, ever do the polls. So that for me was sort of like the essence of this conundrum, right? Are the polls still not picking up those voters because they don't want to do it? Or are actually they are picking the Trump supporters because Trump supporters now more than ever, he is at his most popular, arguably, than he ever has been with the best poll numbers, that they are now more confident, more bolshy, more confident that they will win this election.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the thing I have actually heard from many people, both in Atlanta and in Philadelphia, when we traveled through Philadelphia, it's this idea that both sides, not with everyone, but with quite a few people, both sides believe that if they lose this election, even by a sliver, it's the end of the world, right? They're just, America will become a sort of one-party communist North Korea under Comrade Kamala, as Trump keeps calling her. And then the other side say, well, if he wins, it's going to be fascist, he's going to be a dictator. And of course, both of those things are probably nonsense. But the thing that I find so striking is that the democracy message, right, that America's democracy is in peril, which works really effectively in Europe, and it works very effectively with many metropolitan Democrats, doesn't seem to worry a sufficient number of Americans. And I wonder if that's because they just believe that their democracy is just, solid, that they're exceptional. America is an exceptional country that will never be in danger of having the experience that Germany had in the 1930s, or that Italy had in the 1920s and 30s and so on. So maybe that's what they believe. And I wonder if that's a misguided belief. And then a lot of other people just say, I haven't got time to think about democracy and autocracy. I just want to put some food on my kid's table. I want to be able to pay less than $8 for a tube of toothpaste. So there's all this stuff coming together. But essentially, there are different candidates appealing to different sections of America, different mindsets. And it's not a dialogue, or it's a dialogue of the deaf. It's like watching Fox News and MSNBC. You might as well be in distant galaxies. They're not talking to each other. No one questions each other's assumptions in this. And I think that combined in a sort of zero-sum election with a tiny number of voters that can decide winner or loser takes all, I think is very dangerous. Kiran, your thoughts?
Yeah, completely. And also the democracy angle is interesting because I think Kamala Harris is leaning into that more and more, and she obviously gave that speech outside the White House, a week before the election. Does her campaign actually think it does work? Or when you actually talk about democracy on the Republican side, if you go and talk to people like I've just been talking to people in Florida who have all these question marks about democracy itself on their side, right? One side saying he's a threat to democracy. The Republicans are saying, well, you guys are potentially fixing the vote as you allegedly did in 2020, which we know wasn't true. So you have these two sides who are also having completely different arguments about democracy. And I think actually, when you think about this zero-sum game and what happens after this election, and the idea on the Democratic side that, this would be the creation of some sort of dictatorship, authoritarianism, whatever. One of the interesting things I heard, again, in Michigan was when I was talking to one of the Republicans there, was I was sort of saying, imagine if Trump won or he lost or whatever, who comes after Trump? And he said, not J.D. Vance, maybe one of Trump's sons. And it made me think that when we talk about the future of America, whether or not Trump is elected, so much of his movement is just him. Does his movement actually fizzle and come away because no one can do what he does? Remember, he's a brand. If you go back to, you were talking about the economy being a massive issue. The reason why Donald Trump will always run away with the economy is because he's been around for 40 years making a brand of being a successful businessman, right? So, again, coming back to the question about what happens to democracy, it's what everyone's potentially asking, and whether or not, if this is as tight election as one assumes it would be, the fact that there will be so many legal disputes, there will be people who might not certify, there will be so many people questioning mail-in ballots, etc., etc. That's, I think, where the democracy argument will eventually go in the next few days. What goes on beyond that? Who knows?
I heard from a friend who works in the administration that they are very worried about unrest. They're very worried about trouble at various polling stations, and the National Guard everywhere is on high alert for any trouble.
I was going to say two things. Just one, going back to this, the argument that the Dems try and make about this sort of existential threat to democracy. If you ask people what they're worried about here, wherever we are, no one leads with that issue. They do lead with the economy and they lead with immigration. And when you nudge them and say, what about democracy? It's not really an argument that they would tick first in the box. Certainly it's one that the Democrats want them to. But if you listen to all the commentators who are willing her to win, it's lead with the economy. Tell people what you're going to do for them and for their lives to make things better. What they have been talking about here, to both of your points, is this idea that the Republicans are trying to get ahead on the idea that this election is already being somehow played with, that the shenanigans are already going on. We're sitting in Berks County where they didn't certify the results in 2020, 2022, the primary results there. They were forced to certify them by a judge. There have been lots of questions about registration of ballots here. Trump is already on stage saying they're cheating. Do you see what they're doing with the ballots? It's not the ballots, it's registration papers. And they're laying the foundations, say folks that we've spoken to this morning, to have evidence that if it is so tight, if it does come down to the wire, and it's here in Pennsylvania and tight counties like Lancaster and Berks, that they're laying the foundation to say, see, I told you so. I told you so. And, that's the threat to democracy, that they're already trying to flag that the Dems are cheating before it's even begun, which is exactly what they did in 2020.
It's really interesting. This time, they did. But actually, this time in 2020, before the election, there wasn't a single lawsuit against anyone. This time around, there were 100 lawsuits already.
200 and something.
Go nowhere. But the fact that it keeps rising every day. So the fact that they're so lawyered up, they're already going to court over something that hasn't even been decided yet is interesting. But conversely, the laws, both on a county level, on a state level, in Congress, about trying to question results or overturning them, they've been tightened up quite significantly, as has the actual process of counting the ballots. So that's much more efficient, or should be much more efficient this time round than last time round. Although Pennsylvania, I notice, is still a bit of an outlier, where the sort of preparation of postal ballots, tearing open the envelopes and starting to prep the count is actually much slower there, where it really counts, than it is elsewhere. Final question before I let you go to your sumptuous cocktail parties, or I don't know, a couple of herbal with Kamala Harris and a Diet Coke with Donald Trump, Kiran. Final question is this, and I know you're going to cop out by saying, "Oh, it's too tight, and I can't possibly," and it's a coin toss. But I'm now pinning you up against the wall, and I'm going to say, you need to tell me what you think is going to happen. What's your answer?
I think that it will, obviously, and you don't want me to say this, it's going to be extremely tight. And I think it will probably come down to counting in this state, in Pennsylvania. I think that the clock will be ticking and several days will pass and we will be waiting, as we were last time, for the result to come through from here, because they can't begin to count the mail-in ballots until the day of the election, and that will take some time. So I think that will happen. Then we'll get it. If you're asking me to say who is going to win at the end of that, I can't tell you. My gut is not telling me. My gut is confused, I'm afraid, Matt. I'm one day her, one day him. I can't answer that.
Kiran, your gut is never confused, so come on, tell me what you think.
I always feel like it's you want to have the answer and you want to get it right. But then I think, for me, it's all about not predicting. It's about reporting and understanding what we're seeing, right? So I am copping out completely. But I think for me, the most fascinating, I'm going to cop out. I'm going to say the most interesting thing for me, Matt, right, is when we talk about, it's all about Donald Trump, right, and how he has completely dominated politics for the last decade. and how, you've been talking about the maxim of it's all about the economy, stupid, right? What James Carville said famously in '92 when Bill Clinton won. And so that is the assumption which makes you think it's all about Donald Trump, right? Because when it comes to elections, it's all about the fact that the incumbent party isn't particularly popular, Joe Biden, and the economy, while the numbers are doing well, people don't feel right? So therefore you go, Trump's going to win. But Donald Trump is completely changed politics in a way which makes you think that actually, rather than people usually voting for something in an election, Donald Trump has made people consistently vote against something. And that's why I think I can't predict, because he changes the dial in such a way, combined with the fact that Roe versus Wade, something which conservatives have wanted to get rid of for ages, has completely changed the dial as well. So that's why I think it's an unusual election. It's got Trump, it's got Roe versus Wade. And that's why I can't predict. So I'm going to sit on the fence because I like sitting on fences.
Okay, you lot are so boring. The reason why I asked the question...
So what's your answer?
No, wait. It's the only question that people ask me from London. I get texts every day.
Who's going to win?
I get emails saying, come on, who's going to win? That's all they care about.
Your guess is as good as ours.
Whether they want to hold this against me, yes. But my guess is going to be this. Wait for this. Hold on to your chair. Because this will pass. Trump will win the popular vote and Harris will win the electoral college. And there'll be an almighty...
A lot of people say the opposite will be true.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, you can beat me up with this prediction. I'm just trying to make it in. I want you to give something, to have something to talk about later on.
But that is an interesting thing, because there could be a situation where actually, imagine if Trump took Pennsillvania, but Kamala got, North Carolina, got Georgia. You could be a complete mismatch.
Because to quote Socrates, I know so much that I know nothing, and I really know nothing. So let's just put it to bed. Let's go and have a meal, have a stiff drink, and reconvene. Kiran Moodley, Siobhan Kennedy, thank you very much indeed. I'm Matt Frei. This is the American Forecast. We'll see you soon. Have fun.